Hi folks, welcome to episode 47 of the Epochs of the Lotus Eaters. I am of course joined by Bo, and we are on part 3 of our deep dive into Napoleon's life and how fascinating this is. So last time we left off with Napoleon about to be crowned emperor. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And so of course that's a turning point, isn't it? It's good easy for historians to say sort of the pre-emperor years and the post-emperor years, and we talked a little bit how it's hard to say it hasn't subverted the original goals of the revolution and various degrees of that. But actually, I was going to save it for a bit later, but it's now a perfect time. Lots of people fell out of love with Napoleon around the world when this happened.
Oh, really?
And lots of people were, one way or another, kind of on board with his project.
Well,
one way or another. But
you can see why, because he's spreading the Enlightenment. You know, this is the revolutionary philosophy of the French. And making yourself emperor? Is that Enlightenment values?
No.
Is that what the project was supposed to be? Possibly not.
No, there's a great line. Where is it? I can't find it here, but it was by Beethoven.
Right.
Now, Beethoven, like a lot of people, was just a fan of Napoleon to begin with. In fact, he dedicated one of his really early symphonies, it might be the first symphony, to Napoleon. And then when Napoleon crowned himself emperor, apparently Beethoven crossed it out.
Yeah. It's one thing being first consul.
Right.
It's another thing being the emperor.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just to be clear, an emperor is a hereditary position. And from the Enlightenment's perspective, an illegitimate one. So it's not elective. You pass it down to your lineage. This is the antithesis of Enlightenment values.
So Beethoven fell out of love with or saw Napoleon for what he was at that point, I think is more accurate. And yeah, he scratched out his dedication to Napoleon, and he said of Napoleon, "He is a vulgar person who has lowered himself to the level of an ordinary king. Emperor Napoleon is nothing more than an ordinary mortal."
Ooh.
But
cutting.
I think, yeah. I think though that was indicative of how lots of people felt about him. He sort of revealed himself to be sort of
the old mould.
Yeah, right. Much more ancient regime than
than
a Robespierre figure.
Yeah, because I mean, at the time, this is all like bold, new, progressive, exciting. The new man is being born, and then suddenly, Napoleon's like, actually, I'm just like the old boss. I'm not the new boss.
It does put you in mind of the Who song, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Meet the old boss, same as the old boss. So he's at a point in his career where he's got he's not completely surrounded by belligerent enemies that have got armies on the march. So he's actually got a couple of times really when he's got sort of a bit of breathing space.
And what year are we talking here?
1804.
1804.
So before I just talk in detail about his coronation and all that sort of thing, just wanted to sort of kind of quickly switch scenes over to England about our reaction to things.
Before we do, so the French Revolution is 1789, and Napoleon first comes on the scene in what?
96, is it, or 97?
Yeah. And so it's been a really short period of time.
Yeah.
Like historically. It's a very, very short period of time that this corporal becomes the emperor.
Yeah, incredibly quick. I mean, incredibly quick. And in fact, the year 1805 is an even bigger year, if anything. You could argue it's it's Napoleon's biggest year for him in terms of victories and things.
And the reason I put this out as well is because people, I think, forget how slowly information traveled in the pre-modern world, not just the ancient world. Like, you find out about something that happened this morning on social media in the afternoon, but they might take weeks or months to discover that X has happened. And so when information travels that slowly, 15 years is a very rapid space of time to come from, overthrow all kings to the emperor of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely, that's the thing. And especially when, we're not going to talk much about America, but when news has to travel across the Atlantic, or if you want to get news from Canton or India or the Cape, it's weeks and weeks or a few months before it gets back to London or Paris or whatever it is.
It's amazing that global empires could be sustained in this time, frankly.
Yeah. I was listening to Will Durant. Will Durant is great.
It's fantastic.
And he was saying how Napoleon crammed 100 years of events into 20. Because he'll cram a week into a day. And he was extremely hardworking.
He's always busy.
Yeah, I mean, lots of leaders, it's propaganda that they worked ridiculously hard.
Yeah.
Like Mao's propaganda was that he worked ridiculously hard and never slept. It just wasn't true.
Yeah, obviously.
But some people, I mean, Thatcher said that she barely slept and worked constantly, and people who were her detractors said, no, yeah, she did. She was constantly working. Well, it's not quite the same with Bojo, is it?
Yeah. Same as Caesar and things. Constantly,
right.
Yeah. But you get those figures,
Napoleon
don't you?
Was a hard worker.
Yeah. Okay, so what's going on in England?
So
the implacable ancient foe,
and they were his bitterest foe.
Yes.
I mean, apparently, even on St Helena, he in his last days and things,
spoiler alert.
His feelings towards a lot of his enemies died down, and he became a bit more relaxed, chilled out about it. But not England.
Of course,
he remained very bitter about England to his last breath. But we, of course, had hoped we would have done away with him by this point, or we'd hoped the French government would have collapsed like they kept doing.
Yeah.
We'll have a new one.
Yeah.
But he didn't because, well, he's who he is. And so our politics started not exactly falling apart, but we had, so Pitt the Younger was Prime Minister for a long time, from like the early 80s, 1780s, for nearly 20 odd years there. Then he was ousted for a couple of years, and then he came back for 2 years. Between, 1803, 04, 05, those years, he was back again for sort of a swan song, because then he died. But I've got a quote here from Sir Charles Oman, which sums it up. It says, quote, "It was always England that stood between him, Napoleon, and complete success. Hence it came that he honoured her with a venomous hatred such as he never bestowed on any other foe. It may be said with much truth that all his whole career after 1803 was a crusade against England, and that all his actions were directed to secure her ruin." So that says it all, because, like I say, we if the Prussians and the Russians weren't really in a position to do anything concrete against Napoleon, we'd just pay them to do it.
Yeah.
We'd make it happen.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other quotes which perhaps you'd have read the other time when we were talking about how he had loads of men lined up in and around Boulogne, just ready to bounce across the channel if and when he could, but he needed to open the channel first, and so it gets us to. Oh, sorry, I should talk about his coronation a bit before we get on to Trafalgar, because it is later.
Maybe.
Yeah, we have to mention it.
I mean, it seems significant.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've seen the painting of Napoleon in his regalia, and it's like,
Yeah, so he decided...
Strange aesthetic clash.
Yeah. He puts that big N in the middle of things. It's sort of... I wonder what a modern psychologist would think. Oh, is there a thing called like the Napoleon complex or something, where you just
you're a short, inconsequential man who has to prove himself excessively,
and sort of just dreams that they're sort of the master of the world. I suppose he would sort of had hoped that. I mean, one of the lines, I think I said it in the last one, was that if I can open the channel for 6 hours, I'll be master of the world. Another quote, just real quick, from Napoleon said that wherever I went, I found the Royal Navy.
That must have been so infuriating.
But one thing I would say, a quick quote here, is that when Britain realised that what Napoleon was doing, because there was a couple of years there where he'd stationed tons and tons of guys in northern France, so we know what's going on, we've got spies. But in that time, Sir Charles Oman tells us, quote, "The dockyards of Britain were worked with such zeal and speed that 166 new vessels were added to the Navy before the year was over."
Wow.
So we realised what was going on and did something about it, sort of thing. Okay, but so he's getting coronated, as we said in the last one as well, that it's just nothing's enough for him. Being first consul, which is king in all but name, completely unassailable political position, it seems, that wasn't enough. That just wasn't enough. So Sir Charles Oman tells us, quote, "In the spring of 1804, an abortive royalist conspiracy against him was detected, and he took advantage of it to assume a higher and more and firmer position in the state than that of First Consul. Accordingly, his servile Senate requested him to accept the title of Emperor. In May 1804, he forced the Pope, who stood in mortal dread of annexation, to come up to Paris and preside at his coronation, a great and costly pageant which marked the end of even the shadow of liberty in France. Bonaparte assumed the title of Napoleon I, thus marking his own strange Christian name as for the first time since history began." End quote. So there's the thing about the Pope there. I'm sorry.
Well, that's literally taking on the characterization of the kings, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's King Louis XIV, King Louis XV, blah, blah, blah. So he's Napoleon I. So, I mean, he may as well be just saying, well, I'm entering myself into the annals of royalty in France.
Yeah.
Not very progressive.
Yeah, well, he actually sort of dethrones kings and princes and puts his brothers all over the place.
Oh, yeah,
so
not just in France, elsewhere in Europe.
He wants the Bonaparte family to be as prestigious as the Habsburgs or more even. Yeah, he wants it to be a real dynasty.
Yeah.
You know, he expects his son later, because he gets divorced and remarried and has a son. He wants his son to inherit everything, you know, just like a monarch, just like any hereditary monarchy. So apparently this coronation there was an extreme pomp and ceremony.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, and it was in Notre Dame, and it was with all regalia possible. And one of the things, because, you know, we mentioned in the last one as well, that Napoleon's had a grand scheme of making a rapprochement with the church. So one of his ideas was to get the Pope, because I'll put up a map, but you can see on the map that France controls all of northern and all of southern Italy. There's only a strip of papal states in the middle, which you can imagine he's got extreme influence over, but he's not formally annexed them or anything.
But it's just a formality.
Right.
I mean, it's not like the Pope sat there going, well, we're an independent state. So, you know,
Well, the Pope that it says there was kind of terrified of
French
armies, maybe not necessarily personally of Napoleon, but he was terrified that just any given day, French armies would be marching into Rome.
So, I mean, it seems like a realistic fear.
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely.
Frankly, you know.
Well, what happens later?
Well, yeah, exactly.
He makes his son the king of Rome.
Yeah.
A bit later, but so where the Pope has come to crown him, just like Charlemagne, you know, there's parallels there with Charlemagne. But actually, just mentioned super quick, one of the things Charlemagne allowed the Pope to crown him, and later in his life, the Pope said, you know, I bestowed royalty upon you. I stand above you. The papal crown, the papal diadem is above your crown. And it caused problems, all sorts of problems.
Well, yeah.
So Napoleon didn't allow that. He took the crown of France from the Pope and put it on his own head.
Oh, really?
So the symbolism of that, you know, can't be missed.
Yeah, because normally the Pope would be the one putting the crown on.
I mean, even the English monarch, it's the Archduke of Canterbury,
puts the crown
Archbishop of Canterbury, rather, puts the crown on, so to have a monarch physically take the crown and put it on his own head.
God, Napoleon's ego just knows no bounds, does it? There's literally, I am the greatest thing in all of human history above God and his representative on earth. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and then he then takes the empress's crown and places it himself on Josephine's head.
But this is so symbolic of the Enlightenment generally. The idea that the character of the Enlightenment can be embodied in Napoleon is actually quite striking. This total lack of respect for anything not of its own making. You know, it's like, if you're not, you know, I don't respect anything that came before me. Essentially, this is year zero. Everything begins with me and ends with me. I'm the ultimate arbiter. If something traditional is to exist, it exists at my pleasure. You know, this is a brutal, like, worldview. And Napoleon embodies it completely here.
Yeah.
It's mad.
Yeah, it's almost perfect, isn't it?
Yeah.
When people say things long before the Napoleonic era, people say things like, "Oh, well, revolutions can lead," or things that, like, even in the ancient world, democracies can lead to a demagogue, which will lead to an autocrat, which will lead to blah 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 blah. Napoleon couldn't be a more perfect example of it in a way.
Yeah. It's mad. It's absolutely mad.
But there's very famous, like, among Napoleon's most famous line, I think he said about the whole thing. He said, quote, "I dethroned no one. I found the crown of France in the gutter and I picked it up."
Yes.
Now, that's a very famous line of his, isn't
it? Again, you say that, but you're a part of the intellectual movement that killed the king and dethroned the monarchy as an institution, you know? And so, again, Michael Oakeshott's got a great way of looking at it. It's like everything about sort of the rationalistic politics of the Enlightenment acts as if it's always year zero and every man is a self-made man. You know, Napoleon being like, well, I just turned up, I just found a crown of France, I just put it on. It's like, no, you are exactly part of the process. You know, you can't say you owe nothing to the events that came before you, you know, to allow you to rise through the ranks, to allow you to see the crown in the gutter. and it is all the politics you played into your entire career, and you were acting as if nothing that came before had any influence on your status and ability. It's all a lie, is what is being said there, you know, and it's arrogant, it's hubristic. It's saying, I owe nothing to those people who came before me, and I owe nothing to those people who come after me, because they won't even understand that there was a process here. They'll see themselves at year zero as self-made men, you know, as if it's always now and never then or will be. And it's mad the way that they view the world. And in contrast to this, and we'll get to England in a second, I suppose. In contrast to this, you have the sort of Burkean English who, I mean, Burke's literally like, look, Rousseau has made no inroads with us. You know, we don't care. We've got old traditions and, you know, unthinking ways of doing things, our prejudices, and we like them, and we're going to keep them. And ironically, we're going to win. You know, you might be very, very clever, self-made men, but we're not self-made men. You know, we're the carriers of a great tradition, and we are, you know, doing this. And this is what leads us to the victory in the end, incidentally.
Right, yeah. I think Napoleon, it's kind of obvious to say, I suppose, but there's certain people throughout history that, well, I've already said it, in fact, it's just nothing's ever enough. And that everything has to revolve around them, but to an absurd degree, though. I'm thinking of maybe someone like Domitian or Nero or Stalin or something. Not an ounce of credit to anyone else. It's all me. And, well, yeah, Napoleon seems to be very much in that mould, doesn't he?
But Napoleon is literally the Enlightenment writ large, though. You know, pretending that he owes nothing to anyone else, pretending he's a self-made man at year zero, and all this. Everything begins and ends with him, and none of that is true. And this is the great sort of untruth that underpins the Enlightenment as a project. And that's not saying nothing good came out of it or anything like that. I'm not saying that, you know, I don't support or respect the Enlightenment or anything like that, but it's just like it is a truth that there is a concealment within it, and Napoleon is showing this, you know, here and now. You know? But anyway, sorry, I'll let you carry on with the narrative.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, so we'll have to get his grand plan was to invade Britain.
Yes,
because he knew that we were his first enemy.
Yes,
but it's that classic thing that the Royal Navy controlled the Channel, so he had to come up with a plan to deal with that. And there was sort of various Pitt and Addington governments, but we're just about able to keep the policy that we would remain vigilant against France.
Seems wise.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Have just self-interest, if nothing else.
I think already people, at least if they didn't completely understand, they were starting to understand that Napoleon just would never, you could never trust him. He would never be trustworthy. So any peace with him would be some sort of dodgy hiatus between wars rather than anything else.
I mean, he's got a deep animus against Britain, and he's always looking for a moment of weakness. Like I said, 6 hours and I can get across the channel. Exactly. Look, this is an implacable enemy.
So he hadn't annexed Spain or anything yet, because we're going to talk all about the Peninsular War in another Epochs, because it's so important all in itself. And it's a bit later. It's not until sort of 1807, 1808 it even kicks off there formally, properly. France's invasion of Portugal and Spain, and then our response to it. But even at this point, the Spanish crown is certainly on board with Napoleon. Whatever the French sort of ask them to do, they're sort of obliged to do. I mean, they're kind of a second-rate power.
Well, yeah, absolutely. By this point.
And their monarchy is super weak.
When did they lose their empire? They've lost their empire by now.
Well, it depends how you say it. Not entirely, no. There's still bits and bobs. I mean, they still controlled Florida.
Oh, do they?
At this point.
Right, okay.
Yeah, but however, it's all super shaky. I mean, there's like New Spain, which is Mexico.
Yeah.
Or sort of Mesoamerica. And it's not too many years after what we're going to talk about where all of that has to be completely given up. And the monarchy of Spain is superseded. Napoleon puts his oldest brother, Joseph, on the throne. Right. Does away. They had some sort of quisling minister that the King of Spain, who was sort of an inbred imbecile, couldn't do without. Literally wouldn't sit down to dinner unless he was next to him. It was a really weird relationship. But we'll get, and his first minister dude was not competent. So it all collapses for Spain in a few years' time.
A degenerative empire.
Collapse.
France is the lodestone of power and glory in Europe at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.